So, Metal Gear Solid was acclaimed to be one of PlayStation 1's finest titles, and it's still fun to play to this day, with Snake already being a pretty popular character in video games. The game was so good that Sons of Liberty for PlayStation 2, PC, and Xbox was one of the most highly anticipated sequels at the time. What, you're expecting Josh? No, this video is all Damien. Everyone knows that you can just take a good franchise, throw somebody new in it, that's perfectly fine. So, you're expecting Josh? You wanted Josh? You're not gonna get a job.
What are you doing?
Metal Gear Solid 2 review?
No, that's what I should be doing.
Can't I do it too?
Well, it's been a while since I did a duo review, and Kyle's not done a review in 2 years, so I guess he can join.
Who's Kyle?
Exactly. Metal Gear Solid 2.
So yes, as Damien said, Metal Gear Solid was a huge success and got everybody into the games, rather than strictly for the Japanese. And people went nuts for Sons of Liberty when they saw the teasers and trailers. When the game was finally released in 2001 in North America and Japan, fans of Metal Gear Solid finally got to see some more action with the legendary Solid Snake. Something you'll notice when you start a new game is that this one has 2 chapters, with the first one being a short hour-long prologue, and the second being the rest of the game. Sort of like what they're doing now with Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, except that we don't have to pay $40 to play just the prologue. The first chapter takes place 2 years after the Shadow Moses incident in a tanker in Manhattan. Yes, I'm aware that this game came out shortly after 9/11, let's move past that. Snake and Otacon are now part of an anti-Metal Gear vigilante organization called Philanthropy, and it's Snake's job to investigate the tanker for a new type of Metal Gear called Ray that's being delivered somewhere by American Marines. Shortly after Snake gets on board, however, Russian Marines arrive and attack the Americans as they too want to look for Metal Gear, with the people in charge being Colonel Sergei Gurlukovich, his daughter Olga Gurlukovich, and Revolver Ocelot making a return from the last game. Snake, only equipped with a tranquilizer gun, has to once again sneak his way around the guards and find Metal Gear the hard way.
Metal Gear Solid 2 actually has quite a number of new gameplay mechanics compared to the last game. Sneaking is a little more complicated this time. Unlike the first Solid game, the guards don't disappear after you take them out, which means that you probably need to use Snake's new ability of dragging bodies and putting them in lockers to hide them from the other guards. The alert phase is now triggered after the enemies call for backup, which gives you a little bit of time to either destroy their radio or neutralize them. The enemy AI as a whole is a lot smarter than last time, despite having the small cone of vision. Like I said earlier, they can check bodies to see if their buddies are either sleeping or dead, but they can also now see your shadows, check in lockers to see if you're there, they'll send other guards to replace the ones that you've killed, and there's also a third countdown that occurs after the evasion state, where the enemies in the backup that are called will have even better senses than before. Even if you can take out the guard before he can finish calling for reinforcements, they'll still be very suspicious as to what's going on and send in a backup unit anyway.
The controls have also been improved a bit since the last game. In addition to Snake now being able to slowly walk and get behind a guard more quietly, you now have to press either the L2 or R2 buttons to peek around corners. You're able to hang on to ledges with 3 levels of grip power if you tediously do 100 pull-ups. You can finally use your weapons in a first-person view, although you still can't move while in this view, and you can hold up enemies and make them shake their booties for items. Holding up an enemy for the first time will also let them drop their dog tags, which is pretty much this game's collectibles. You thankfully don't have to pick them up again once you do so, and if you beat the game with enough of them, you'll unlock the returning infinite ammo bandana and stealth camouflage from the first Solid game. Getting these special items though is much more of a pain than last time, because in order to get enough dog tags, you need to play through the chapter on multiple difficulties. Take the stealth camouflage for example, where you need to collect 80 dog tags in order to unlock it. Each difficulty level has a certain number of guards. The higher the difficulty, the more guards there are, with most of the difficulties having less than 35 enemies to hold up in the tanker chapter. So even if you get all the dog tags on the hardest difficulty, you still won't have enough to get the stealth camouflage, which means that you've got to choose another difficulty level and complete that chapter all over again, praying to God that you'll have enough this time. I personally think that this gets extremely boring to do after a while, and it sucks that the game requires you to collect so many. The payoff is rewarding, yes, but the scars are permanent. This is especially tough with the new Game Over if Discovered modes on the harder difficulties, which is pretty much how it sounds. Get caught and it's game over before you can say damn it.
Snake, are you okay? Snake! Snake!
Some of the cutscenes are also quite a bit longer than before, and at times the dialogue is even more redundant, but thanks to the improved graphics and sound, they're more visually interesting. Look, the characters actually have eyeballs now.
The version I'm playing off of, however, is from the HD collection for the PS3 and Xbox 360, containing sharper textures and a smoother frame rate, which to me is the definitive version of the game, especially on the PS3. The mouth movements on the characters are pretty laughable though, and it can almost take the seriousness out of a number of scenes.
I don't have a clue. All they're doing is watching. It would creep me out less if they tried to interfere with our communications.
Because all people talk like this, right? Metal Gear.
So anyway, after exploring the tanker for a bit, Snake comes across Olga and immediately has a gun battle with her, which is sort of like an upgraded version of the Ocelot fight from the last game, and it's mainly a way to practice your first person aiming. Once Olga has been knocked out, Snake then heads towards the hold of the tanker where Metal Gear Ray is being stored, and you have to pass through a million Marines to get to it. Snake's job is then to take pictures of Ray from various angles to use as proof of there being a newly built Metal Gear model. And what a coincidence, there happens to be a computer in the far corner to upload the photos. Once that's done, Ocelot comes in to steal Ray and betrays both Gerlukovich and the Russians, shooting everybody down as well as the Marine commander. However, just as Ocelot is about to hijack Ray, Liquid starts suddenly possessing Ocelot through his transplanted right arm, which was originally his.
And now you're probably wondering how the hell Ocelot lost his arm in the first place. Well, something I forgot to mention in the first Metal Gear Solid was that after the fight against him, just before Grey Fox frees the Arms Tech president, he stops Ocelot from shooting Snake by cutting off his hand, which is why you see it wrapped in a bandage throughout the rest of the game. So, with that out of the way, Ocelot escapes the tanker with Ray, leaving it sinking into the ocean and the soldiers sleeping with the fishes, including Snake. This is where the second chapter comes in for the remainder of the game, taking place 2 years after the tanker incident in a cleanup facility called the Big Shell, where Snake is seen still alive, but his voice doesn't sound quite right, and he has long flowing blonde hair when you control him. No, actually, we're now playing as a completely new character codenamed Raiden, real name Jack, with Colonel Campbell once again giving the orders, and Jack's girlfriend Rosemary being the new analyst.
Jack, you're stuck with me whether you like it or not.
Rose.
Jack! Jack! Rose! Jack! Rose, I'm in here!
No, we are not starting that again. Anyway, Raiden controls exactly like Snake does and has the same abilities, only he was able to roll into enemies, while Raiden does this zany cartwheel attack. And he also has to gain access to various nodes in order to get the radar on screen, so I'd recommend using the AP sensor to listen to the guards' heartbeats and see if any are near. Raiden also uses various wigs for infinite ammo and invisibility instead of a bandana and stealth camouflage. Unlike Snake though, Raiden's able to use two more special items, the orange wig and the blue wig. The orange wig gives Raiden an infinite amount of grip, while the blue wig lets him breathe underwater without losing oxygen. Though both of these wigs require a crapload of dog tags to collect, so be prepared to play through quite a few different difficulties.
Raiden's job is to rescue some hostages, locate the president, and stop a new terrorist group called the Sons of Liberty and their special forces unit called Dead Cell, consisting of a bomb expert named Fat Man, a kinda sorta vampire called Vamp, and a woman who can't die called Fortune, as she uncontrollably deflects any form of weaponry. With the leader of Sons of Liberty claiming himself to be Solid Snake, and the Russian mercenaries now led by Olga from the tanker chapter. The Sons of Liberty demand $30 billion in cash, otherwise they'll launch a nuke on the Big Shell, causing an enormous environmental hazard. Not long into the planned chapter, Raiden will come across the real Snake, using a fake name and disguising himself as a member of an assault team patrolling the Big Shell, known as Iroquois Pliskin, which is meant to be a reference to Escape from New York with Kurt Russell playing Snake Plissken, but I've never seen that movie. So Pliskin and Raiden need to work together in order to make this mission successful, with each of them going in separate paths. Otacon's also there with Snake to help him save one certain hostage sighted around Big Shell, which is his sister, Emma Emmerich, or EE as she's nicknamed.
Now from here on out, until you do find the president, the story doesn't really go anywhere, and you just sort of do stuff. At one moment you're freezing Fat Man's bombs, and another moment you're disguised as an enemy soldier roaming around the core of one side of the base, and in another moment you're sniping at control panels that trigger explosives. While Raiden does meet up with another cyborg ninja and one of the president's agents as a hostage called Richard Ames, who tells you that Dead Cell's objective was to nuke the Big Shell all along and eventually dies of a heart attack similar to what happened to Decoy Octopus and the Arms Tech president in the last game, you don't really get to the president until a little over halfway through the game, where the plot keeps on going. Okay, when Raiden is just about to cross the bridge to the other side of the plant, where the president is being held, he comes across the leader of the Sons of Liberty, who happens to be the third son of Big Boss, called Solidus Snake, because I'm guessing Gas Snake probably wouldn't have been taken as seriously. Where Pliskin reveals to Raiden that he's the real Solid Snake and that Solidus is an imposter. And he's also an ex-president of the United States named George Sears, which is who Ocelot was talking to at the end of the last game. Unlike Solid and Liquid Snake, however, Solidus is a perfect clone of Big Boss, with no flawed genes in the slightest, so naturally you would think that this guy would be really intimidating and frightening, right?
No, Solidus is actually kind of a boring villain. There isn't a distinctive personality about him, and since he's a perfect clone of Big Boss, that means there is nothing to sympathise with him about. Granted, Liquid wasn't exactly the deepest of villains either, but until after the credits we thought he had all of Big Boss's imperfect genetic structure, which you could at least have a slight bit of remorse about. And he was also entertaining to watch with his over-the-top acting and gestures. Solidus just talks in this generic tough guy voice and doesn't make himself stand out in any way. He's mostly talk rather than do, which is not very engaging at all.
In fact, the entirety of Dead Cell is nowhere near as riveting as Foxhound was in the last game. Despite them having the same amount of screen time as the Foxhound members, they don't really make good use of their time. With maybe the exception of Fat Man, who at least has some build up to him while defusing the bombs, and you're given a bit of backstory about him when you meet up with another member of the assault team called Peter Stillman, but Vamp's prancing and tone of voice is just too flamboyant for me to take seriously, and I couldn't care less about Fortune, as literally in every scene she's in, she's always complaining about not being able to die and see her dad. For Christ's sake, get a grip, lady! Dead Cell and Solidus as a whole are just not that interesting to me, and unfortunately their boss battles don't make up for it either. Batman tries to be like the Vulcan Raven fight from the last game, but because Raiden doesn't have a lot of his equipment yet and Batman himself moves too quickly, you're not left with a whole lot of options to kill him. Fortune's is basically a script event where all you have to do is dodge a railgun and hide behind cover, and Vamp's is just a case of keeping up with him and shooting at the right moment. And falling into this deadly pool in the middle of the room is instant death, which when I fall in, I get really annoyed. But the Harrier that Vamp and Solidus control acts pretty much like the helicopter fight with Liquid in MGS1, which I guess is okay, but that was one of my least favorite fights in that game to begin with, so that's not saying a whole lot. This is also where Solidus loses his eye to complete the big boss look and still not make him threatening.
Sons of Liberty seems to also be influenced by Metal Gear 2's approach with its constant backtracking around Big Shell. Well, okay, it's not quite as bad as Metal Gear 2, and it's mainly throughout the first half of the plant chapter, as backtracking slowly dies out in the second half, keeping the game slightly more linear. But that doesn't excuse how repetitive the structure and the design of the Big Shell can be.
Shadow Moses Island had a lot of variety with its areas. There was your typical green and blue colored interior of the base, but there were also some snowy outdoor environments, a building full of leaking nukes, a commander's office, a dark area filled with wolves, a furnace, a freezer, and a damp hangar that stored Metal Gear wrecks. Once you've been inside a few rooms and crossed a couple of bridges to different struts of the Big Shell, however, you've pretty much seen it all. The graphics are definitely better than the last game, but the areas don't really expand upon looking like a generic cleanup facility. The story is also even more complicated than the last one, and rather than animating everything in a real-time cutscene or just simply editing the dialogue, whenever Metal Gear Solid 2 needs to splurge out a heavy amount of exposition to the player, it's mostly in a needlessly long codec conversation where the characters talk with nanocommunication, whatever that is. Even when these two characters are in the same room together and they're clearly alone, they still insist on talking about crucial plot points in a codec call. What's the point? When you meet up with Ames where there are a couple of guards patrolling the room, then that's fine, but how exactly does it work? Do they just hear each other's thoughts in their heads or something? How do they tune into the right frequency? Can anybody be in the same chat room as them? I don't get it. And nothing in the game tells you about nanocommunication in the slightest, so it's pretty much a mystery. But there's one last problem to address. One so big that it ruined many players' experience, and it still does to this day. You all know what it is, and you've been waiting for us to bitch about it, so we're not going to waste any more of your time. The inclusion of Raiden. This comes as no surprise, because as a lot of you know, Raiden is often seen as one of the most hated video game characters of all time. Why? Because apart from constantly repeating the other characters in the form of a question, he's the exact opposite of Snake. Let's run down the list here. Snake at this point is a highly skilled warrior with plenty of experience. Raiden is only just doing his first mission. Snake is handsome and charming and has women fawning over him. Raiden's a generic pretty boy struggling with the relationship he currently has. Snake is a miserable soul but has a likable personality to him. Raiden has next to nothing to sympathize with him about. In fact, we don't know anything about Raiden as soon as we start the game. It just decides to throw us in with him and expects us to talk to him. And while I'm willing to listen to what he has to say about himself, he thinks he's too cool to want to talk to me or anybody else in the game about his personal feelings. And as a result, aside from Snake, he acts like a total asshole to the people who care about him and want to help. Like take this scene for example when Raiden doesn't have the right key card to get through a door and it turns out that Emma has one that works.
What the?
Are you impressed?
You should have told me you had it.
You're welcome. Jerk.
I personally disagree. I think Raiden is just subject to poor development, but a good character. It feels like he's intended to be relatable in comparison to Snake's character, and not everybody can see themselves as a tough guy. Unfortunately, this made Raiden just seem like he came with a lot of baggage since all Rose does is whine throughout.
Yeah, Rose really annoys me too. She constantly interrupts Jack's mission in the gameplay just to ask what day it is tomorrow, where Raiden doesn't know when Rose refuses to tell him. I don't care. Just let me play the damn game. But what bothers me even more is that it's so freaking obvious and this moron still can't see it. It's the day that you two met, you fucking idiot. I don't even know anything about you and I could still guess as to what day it is tomorrow.
Anyway, when Raiden does reach the President and gets groped for some reason, he tells him the big shell is actually camouflage hiding another Metal Gear. Not Ray, but a large warship that conceals a secret AI called GW, which controls the information that gets put out to the public, basically censoring the internet. In addition, democracy is all just one big scam, as the true rulers of America are a secret organization called the Patriots, with Solidus falling out with them and having to resign as president because of the Shadow Moses incident. The only way to destroy GW and stop the Patriots is to find Emma Emmerich and upload a virus disk that she coincidentally made for this occasion. Ocelot then comes in and kills the president, which leaves Raiden to now find Emma and erase GW, which doesn't take long at all. This here is the worst part of the game, because you have to keep holding Emma's hand as she and Raiden swim across a flooded strut, walk very, very slowly, and snipe your way to the main computer room where Snake and Otacon are, and Emma can upload the virus. Unfortunately, Vamp comes in all spick and span and stabs Emma in the gut before being shot again. Not only that, but the virus stops at 90% when Raiden does make it, which means that he and Snake are somehow going to have to get inside Arsenal Gear and take out Solidus. Otacon then goes to escape with the hostages while the ninja comes in, revealing himself to be Olga and Snake double-crossing Raiden.
With Raiden knocked out and thrown into a torture chamber, Solidus tells Raiden that he once adopted him and turned him into a child soldier during the First Liberian Civil War with the title Jack the Ripper. As Solidus and Ocelot leave the chamber, Olga then tells Raiden that she had to capture him in order for him to get inside Arsenal Gear because she's a double agent working for the Patriots, who blackmail her that if she doesn't help Raiden and he dies, then her child dies along with him.
Don't you just love it when your boss threatens to kill your kid if you don't work for them?
Olga then helps Raiden to escape, informing him that Snake has his equipment, where we then have to— what the hell? I'm playing as a naked Raiden.
Well, I'm not exactly sure as to why he thinks being embarrassed to show his junk is a bigger problem than having to sneak around guards that want to kill you, but while you're doing this, Campbell keeps calling you to switch the game off and speaking in a deeper voice, reminiscent to what Big Boss did in the original Metal Gear. You only have a small space of Arsenal Gear to travel through, but it's a breath of fresh air to going around the big shell for several hours, and it's got a nice atmosphere to it. After receiving several calls from the Colonel, Rose starts contacting you, saying that she's actually a spy looking over Raiden and faking her identity. Naturally, this gets Raiden upset.
Yeah, but at this point I'm willing to bet that anything can get Raiden upset. But as soon as the call is about to cut off, Rose begins talking in a deeper voice too, just as she says that she's carrying their baby. After that, Snake comes back in his normal clothes and gives Raiden his gear, as well as a sword that Olga wanted him to have, introducing the brief swordplay mechanic. It's not exactly the most fluent of control, but once again it's a nice change to the gameplay from using guns throughout most of it. Otacon then calls to explain to Raiden that the Colonel that he's been taking orders from is actually an AI from GW's programming, and the part of the virus they uploaded is proving effect, which is why Campbell's been talking weird and giving Raiden odd instructions. Raiden and Snake then encounter a large number of soldiers with guns, and swords as well, and eventually come across Fortune, who battles with Snake alone, while Raiden has to take down 25 Metal Gear Ray units with an arsenal and Solidus watching him. Well, you don't need to destroy exactly 25 Rays, but depending on the difficulty determines how many Metal Gears you need to beat. The higher the difficulty, the more units you need to take apart. It concerns me that Ray is much weaker than Rex from the last game if you fire stinger missiles at his leg and then aim for the head, in addition to having 3 Rays come at you simultaneously and not bother attacking all at once. But I imagine if that were to happen, then this part would probably be unplayable. I overall don't find the Ray fight quite as fun as battling Rex in the last game, but it's not terrible by any means, and it's one of the better boss battles in the game.
After destroying a good number of Metal Gears, Olga comes in to assist Raiden and reveals to Solidus that she's changing sides, but not before he steps in himself and terminates her, as well as him and Fortune capturing Snake and Raiden. On top of Arsenal Gear, Ocelot reveals himself to also be a double agent of the Patriots, and even manages to kill Fortune, which turns out she could only deflect bullets because of a little gizmo she was given. How did she not realize? Whatever. Ocelot then explains that the entire Big Shell mission was a stage show to reenact the events on Shadow Moses Island, to use Raiden to create a soldier similar to the legendary Solid Snake. And look how well that turned out.
Ocelot then hops into the last Ray unit and tries firing missiles at them, but Fortune still manages to deflect them because she's actually Lady Luck. You know, I didn't think it was possible for a video game to jump the shark, but they've done it. Metal Gear Solid 2 has jumped the shark. Ocelot then tries to shoot some more missiles, but in the nick of time, Liquid starts possessing him again, where he plans to use Ocelot's knowledge and the virus disk that he snagged off of Raiden to look for the names of the Patriots and eliminate them, with Snake following Liquid's trails as soon as he escapes and Arsenal Gear crashes into Manhattan, where this conveniently launches Raiden and Solidus on top of Federal Hall. Solidus then tells Raiden about Snake, Liquid, and the Les Enfants Terribles project, and then there's a stupidly long and tedious codec call where I really don't understand what's going on, because the game makes it so needlessly wordy and complicated. From what I can gather, there's another AI that mimics the Colonel and Rose and explains to Raiden that the Big Shell simulation was to test how well they could control human behavior to prevent society from ever knowing what's real. And after 45 minutes of cutscenes, we can finally battle against Solidus, which thankfully is pretty cool as you're sword fighting against him. Though Solidus can be a cheat bastard at times and fire missiles at you, as well as using his tentacles to knock you down and dashing around when you least expect it, with fire coming out of his ass. Blocking can be pretty tricky too, because you have to be at the precise angle to deflect Solidus' sword strikes, which can be pretty frustrating if you don't do it right. Ninja Gaiden, this ain't.
Eventually, Raiden defeats Solidus and falls off Federal Hall, while Snake reunites with him to inform him that he's planted a tracking device on Liquid's Ray, where he and Otacon plan to follow him, rescue Olga's child, and finally hunt down the Patriots, as the virus disk that Snake gave Raiden after uploading it wasn't the real thing, and that the real virus disk Snake has contains a list of the Patriots' names. Raiden is then back together with the real Rose, as he finally figures out what day she was talking about.
I remember now. Today is the day I met you.
No, really? I had no idea.
So we then get this schmaltzy motivational speech about telling people the truth in an epilogue and believing what you want to believe in a post-credits scene, where Otacon finishes going over the disc containing personal data on each member of the Patriots, only to find out that they've already been dead for 100 years.
Foreshadowing.
Beating the game will unlock the boss survival mode, which is pretty much how it sounds, where you have to beat each boss against the clock with no constant health pickups. But there's also the demo theater, where you can take a certain cutscene and change the character's roles, which can lead to some pretty funny imagery, as well as a graphic glitch or two. My personal favorite to fiddle around with is where Raiden delivers the final blow to Solidus. You can have Otacon killing Meryl, you can have Ocelot killing Rose, or as most people do it, Snake killing Raiden. There are also the VR missions to do in this game, but I think I made it clear in the last video how I feel about them.
The original PS2 and Xbox copy of Sons of Liberty also has a minigame to play, representing the Tony Hawk games, where Raiden and Snake ride on a skateboard performing tricks. Due to it not being in the Substance version that came after, and the version that you'll get in the HD collection, we're using some footage off of this user here. I remember enjoying it. It was nowhere near as sophisticated as the Tony Hawk games, but it was like fan service for those that liked both. Or just a promotional tool, but I liked it nonetheless.
No, instead replacing it as Snake Tales, where you go through majority of both chapters now playing as Snake. It's actually pretty disappointing in all honesty, because it's essentially the same game again, just now you're playing as Snake. And like I said, it involves both chapters of the game, which means that one of the tales you can play has you going through the tanker again, where the only difference is that you're looking for Meryl and you get to fight her at the end. This does explain, however, that she and Snake split up after the first game because Meryl idiotically says that Snake cares more about his wolves than he does her. You needy bitch, I saved your ass from a giant robot dinosaur and a psychotic British dude. What more do you want from me, you selfish broad? Anyway, as you can see, there aren't any cutscenes in this mode and is instead taken over by chunks of text that just further adds to the laziness of this mode. The only tale I find vaguely interesting is where Snake has to track down this mythical beast called the Gerlugon, which is basically a giant soldier, and the battle against him is very similar to the one against the giant genome soldiers in VR missions. The end of this tale is Snake fighting against Solidus with his fists, which is a lot harder to do without a sword. Also, how the hell did they crash into Manhattan and land on Federal Hall again? Overall, I feel really sorry for those people who sold their original copy of Sons of Liberty to buy the Subsistence version, only to be extremely disappointed to get Snake Tales instead. They're very boring and a waste of time, don't bother playing them. Oh yes, we almost forgot to talk about the Easter eggs in this game. Well, there aren't quite as much as there were in the original game, but a fair few nonetheless. It's mostly activating certain codec calls, but there are a good number of others you can perform without. For example, in the Tanker chapter, you can send Otacon various pictures with certain reactions to each one, including a ghost image of Hideo Kojima. You can use the directional mic to listen in on Johnny from Shadow Moses in a couple of areas, as well as having Emma's bird repeat Raiden if you keep requesting for Ames.
You must be Ames.
If you type in Hideo Kojima's name while logging into a node, you can get his birth details. You can locate Snake walking in a cardboard box once you start defusing the bombs. You can find Jennifer from the original Metal Gear and look up her skirt, which makes the Colonel and Rose pretty angry. You can shoot at a number of seagulls, which also makes Campbell and Rose mad. And you can make Snake look at pictures of girls to make him pleasure himself. And that, my friends, is Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, one of the most highly anticipated sequels of that time and also one of the most disappointing to a lot of fans. Well, yes, I don't like Raiden, and I don't like a number of certain moments and gameplay mechanics in it, but sneaking around is still a bit of fun. I like the higher emphasis on realism with the controls, and it's a very pretty game to look at for an early PS2 game. The music is still good too. I don't think it's quite as good as the soundtrack for the first Solid game, but I absolutely love this rendition of the main theme. It's got a lot more oomph to it than the MGS1 version thanks to the PS2 CD quality, and it sounds absolutely incredible. I also like the credits theme called Can't Say Goodbye to Yesterday, though granted it is a bit corny. But as for the game itself, Raiden is too whiny and unlikable for me to care about. I think Rose nags too much, the backtracking can feel like a chore, and the villains are pretty weak. But unlike a lot of other gamers and fans who play this game, I don't think these elements hinder the overall experience, as there are a few clever moments here and there, like playing with reality and the Patriots being in charge of America. But even for Metal Gear Solid standards, there are a couple of plot points that don't make a lick of sense, like Liquid's arm taking over Ocelot's body or Fortune being Lady Luck. Metal Gear Solid is all about having fun with typical action movie cliches and Japanese references, but the ones in the last game at least followed how we normally see them. This, however, is a little too much for me to grasp. Like I said, not a bad game, but you're gonna have to play this multiple times in order to understand the story. With that said, we'll give Metal Gear Solid 2 around an 8 out of 10, standing for if you have a transplanted arm, you're in trouble. Alright, now time for 2004's Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes for the GameCube. I know I'm already pushing the length of the video a bit, but bear with me for a minute. The Twin Snakes is a full-on remake of the original Metal Gear Solid, only now with updated 3D graphics, audio, and a similar gameplay style to Sons of Liberty, including putting people in lockers, a caution state, and shooting in first person, which admittedly does make the Ocelot fight a lot easier. The story is exactly the same as it was in the PlayStation version, and the script is almost identical, with most of the same voice actors going through it again. The only exception being Grey Fox, who I think is a much better choice than who they got in the original. Seriously, he actually sounds legitimately badass this time.
I will kill you, or you will kill me. It makes no difference.
Kojima is only producing the game for once, with the development team being Silicon Knights, the same people responsible for creating another GameCube classic, Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. In fact, you can actually find a couple of Easter eggs based on Eternal Darkness, and it's one of Mantis' new games that it can read off of your memory card, as well as a few others.
You seem to like The Legend of Zelda, don't you? Oh, so you've played Super Smash Bros. Melee before.
Surprisingly, most of the Easter eggs from before have managed to get across to the GameCube version, along with a few new ones. In Otacon's lab, you can find a statue of Mario and Yoshi, each with a sound effect. You can play around with the camera in the cutscenes like you can in Sons of Liberty. You can find the Silicon Knights website in the tank hangar on one of the monitors. If you place down a Playboy magazine, you can see that it has one of the main characters from Eternal Darkness. There are a fair few. And as well as Snake being able to wear a tuxedo and Grey Fox looking like Spider-Man again, Meryl's also given her own sneaking suit similar to Snake's, which is pretty nifty.
Borrowing from Metal Gear Solid 2 is the returning dog tags. However, this time they don't unlock anything because you can get the bandana and the stealth camouflage in the exact same way as before, so it's really only a small challenge for you to do if you ever feel like it. The boss survival also transitions from Sons of Liberty, and there's not really a whole lot to talk about it, it's pretty much what it was before. However, if you were for any reason a fan of the VR missions, then I'm afraid to say that they're not present in the game either.
There are a few small things that we forgot to talk about in Sons of Liberty that are also present in this game. In the original Metal Gear Solid, if you wanted to get through a door, you always had to have the key card selected, which, while a bit of a minor problem, got a little annoying after some time. In Twin Snakes, you just need to walk in front of a door and then bam, it opens. Unless if you don't have the right card. In addition to that, when you're nearly low on health, Snake will start bleeding, where the guards can pick up blood trails, unless if you use a band-aid, which I never do, or just stay still and crouch for a while until you stop bleeding.
The controls are pretty much the same as it was in Sons of Liberty, but because the PlayStation controller has so many buttons, it doesn't transition quite as well onto the GameCube.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to agree with that too. They're not terrible controls I find, but at this point I've gotten so used to using the PlayStation controller that it just feels a bit odd using the GameCubes. I find the gameplay as a whole to be much smoother and tighter than the original, and while it's still a short game if you skip all the cutscenes, as well as there still being a small number of guards on the normal difficulty, thanks to the game leaving the areas untouched and giving a complete graphical overhaul, it's a lot more satisfying to get through. But unfortunately, there are a few issues that make somewhat of a big impact to the overall adventure. This one's a bit of a nitpick, but even though the areas are indistinguishable from the originals, the color scheme in this game is a lot darker, while the PlayStation version's colors were a lot brighter, making it easier to see the guards and it rarely made you go through a darkish area. The whimsical moments are still there and delivered just as well in Twin Snakes, but the darker colors make the game look a little more miserable than last time. That, and while the game looks great for a GameCube game and is certainly better looking than the original, it doesn't look quite as good as Sons of Liberty did, despite coming out 3 years later. Especially since they use the PlayStation version's codec portraits again, which now look compressed and blurry, instead of creating polygonal models like with Metal Gear Solid 2. I mean, they've already got the Colonel, Naomi, Otacon, and Meryl, so why not do everybody else? Again, it's a bit of a nitpick, but I thought it'd be something worth addressing. A bigger issue with the game, however, is that even with most of the original cast back on board to redo their lines, the majority of them don't put in nearly as much effort as they did last time. Now when I say that, I'm mainly talking about the Colonel, Naomi, Master Miller, and somewhat Vulcan Raven. All 4 of them sound completely bored with their deliveries, and they really don't sound like they want to be at that recording studio, which I suppose I can't really blame them. If I were asked to revoice a game I've already done, I'd probably get tired of it too, but I wish that at least some effort was put into it. I think with Campbell especially, somebody forgot to tell him that he's not playing an AI anymore and speak naturally like he did in the original. Like take this part for example, when he's just about to reveal Master Miller's true identity.
Snake, that's not Master Miller. Campbell, you're too late.
And here's the version in Twin Snakes.
Snake, that's not Master Miller. Campbell, you're too late.
Oh my god, that's one of the more painful scenes to watch in that game. I'm also concerned as to how even though Master Miller and Liquid are the same voice actor, why does he sound so uninterested when he's playing Miller, yet he's just as hammy as ever when he's doing Liquid? Alright, he's not quite as over the top as last time, but it's good enough. So yeah, the acting is not as well done with Twin Snakes, but even though I enjoy the gameplay more than the original, a lot of people actually don't like this game. Really? People hate this game? I think it's one of the best in the series.
I'm one of those people. Well, I don't necessarily hate it, but I do have a few issues with it. The most common complaint is that the cutscenes now have a lot of bullet time given to them, and that Snake is now some sort of super gymnast as he somehow dodges the attacks that would normally be near impossible to avoid.
Okay, now that I agree is ridiculous, but the bullet time? Really? There are cyborg ninjas, a vampirish character, a psychic floating madman, and a robot dinosaur which these people can accept, yet the bullet time is simply too much for them to handle? I mean, yeah, it was 2004 and the bullet time was most likely a tired formula at this point, especially after the release of The Matrix. But guys, it's Metal Gear freaking Solid! It's supposed to be based on cliché action movies that you're not meant to take seriously, bullet time included. I actually think some of the cutscenes look pretty damn awesome. My personal favorite being when Gray Fox goes up against Rex. Just look at this. This is incredible. So yeah, I strongly disagree with the use of bullet time, but I can absolutely see where these guys are going with Snake's acrobatics. Honestly, some of these can either be very pointless or extremely stupid. Like here, when Snake is listening to Ocelot and Liquid about their plans with Rex. Was that really necessary? Couldn't you just sidestep to the other side of the door while Ocelot and Liquid aren't looking? In fact, do you even need to move from there? Is it so important for you to be on the other side of the door for you to listen in? Or how about this part when Snake is delivering the final blow to Liquid's helicopter? No, you can't do that. Unless if you're a ninja, you can't jump on a fast missile without exploding it. That just doesn't work like that. Breaking the fourth wall is one thing, but that's no excuse to defy the laws of physics.
But there are also a couple of stupid moments that don't involve either bullet time or acrobatics that wasn't in the original game. Like when Snake gets frustrated after hearing that the Armstech president gave Foxhound one of the passwords to activating Metal Gear.
It should be on the back of the package. Try to contact her.
Okay, so we're just gonna forget that Snake just pointed a gun at a hostage? I'm no military expert, but I'm pretty sure that's a definite no-no.
But I think the all-time worst moment in the game is where Meryl's just about to be shot by Sniper Wolf. You guys do know what a laser sight looks like, right? Sniper Wolf's taking a long time. You sure you guys don't want to move at any point? You're gonna get shot. Okay, fine, just stand there like a couple of morons and take the shots. The torture scene's a little easier in this one, but nope, I may as well submit to it. You're not worth it. Overall, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes for me is a definite improvement in the presentation and control, and a lot of the cutscenes are very cool to watch. But unfortunately, it's the acting from some of the characters that ruin it a bit. Which is a shame, because like the original, it was so close to being perfect, but it was brought down by all these little problems. But which do I think is the definitive version to play Metal Gear Solid 1? Well, one major thing that you've got to keep in mind is that the Twin Snakes was never released on any other platform, so if you want to play it anytime soon, you're going to have to get both a GameCube and a pretty pricey copy of the game. It all really depends on what you prefer. If you want much better acting with a simpler gameplay style but with blockier graphics and slightly tattier audio, then get the original PlayStation version. But if you want superior gameplay and a better look at the expense of weaker voice acting, ridiculous stunts, and having to pay a high price for it, then get the Twin Snakes. I can personally look past the more goofy moments just as long as the gameplay is really fun, and that's exactly what the Twin Snakes delivers, which is why I'm giving it a 9.2 out of 10, standing for the same game with a different makeover.
I'd personally have to knock some points off simply because of the control layout. It isn't a reason not to play the game, but it is enough for me to feel uncomfortable, especially having felt the comfort of playing the other iterations on PlayStation. I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
I can't seem to get away from making half-hour reviews for these games, but as of now in this marathon, I'm going to be talking about the last 2 games in separate videos. So when we next meet, we're going to be looking at Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater for the PlayStation 2. Hell yeah!
That looks really awkward.
It's great.
After that, Snake comes in back. Comes in back? What? Who wrote this crap?
There was your typical green and blue coloured interior of the base, but there was also some snowy outdoor environments. A building full of leaking nukes, a commander's office. That's really advertising.
Yeah, that's sort of advertising.
Yeah. Would you like to buy this for your commander's office?
Come to Shadow Moses Island.
Oh my god. Realise that.